And J. Robert is a brilliant guy. Many of you have probably heard of him. I highly recommend his book, Raincoat Sasquatch, if you haven't read that. I rank this as one of the 10 best Bigfoot books ever written. J. Robert is excellent at presenting very detailed, very vivid material. He's very concise. He organizes his material very well. And he's got a kind of an impressive background. J. Robert was he's a physical therapist, but he actually took some anthropology classes at the University of Calgary and learned about Bigfoot or Sasquatch in the early 70s, and ultimately contacted and worked with Renee DeHinden and John Green starting in the early 70s. So he's worked with some of the greats in the Bigfoot field. Really brilliant guy, almost a savant. He talks, I call him occasionally just to kind of catch up, and he just, rattles off facts and figures, and he's very intellectually gifted. But he talks so fast and so much that sometimes you have to have a notepad to kind of get everything he's talking about. But he's documented, he lives in southeastern Alaska, and most of the sightings, according to J. Robert, are on Prince of Wales Island, which is, part of the southeastern Rain Coast, and also many of those islands kind of down there in that particular area. So he's traveled all over Alaska to investigate sightings, but it seems to be the highest concentration there in southeastern Alaska, according to J. Robert. Now, one of the things that J. Robert talks about in his book, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this phenomenon of upside-down trees that have been crammed into the ground, but there's a lot of debate about these. There's a place on Prince of Wales Island called Klawak Lake, and apparently in the 1980s, late 80s, someone discovered these. This is a researcher named Al Jackson, discovered 3 large cedar trees that had been basically crammed into this muskeg upside down. A muskeg is kind of like a marshy area on the side of the lake. And according to the local native elders, these trees had been there for decades. And J. Robert went to this location and looked at these trees, and he couldn't see any sign of manipulation from outside sources. He said there were no cable, grapple marks on the trees, so they had literally been crammed into the ground. The reason I bring this up is that people that have tried to debunk these incidents say, well, this is basically a practical joke that loggers do. When they're clearing the forest, they can use their heavy machinery to basically take a tree, turn it upside down, and drive it into the ground for fun. And then, granted, these trees weigh about 1,000 pounds, so it's hard to imagine unless there was a collaborative effort of several Sasquatches working together. But, it's kind of a polarizing thing, Could a Sasquatch do something like this? I mean, we're talking about a tree that's about 12 feet tall, maybe one that's about 9 feet tall. Very interesting to talk about, if nothing else. A number of abduction stories from Alaska, and we talk about people vanishing in Alaska without a trace. So that's one of the things you hear about. This is, again, Rob Roy Menzies. This is his interpretation of the Albert Ostman abduction. You can see poor Albert there in his sleeping bag being hauled off by the Sasquatch. So again, Rob Roy Menzies, he lives more in the Anchorage area, and recently corresponding with Rob Roy, he told me that, interestingly enough, there's an area up near Homer, Alaska called Hatcher Pass. And that particular area is, according to him, there have been a lot of sightings and activity there, and the local natives refer to it as Wild Man Pass. So a lot of history from that particular area as well. And I'm speeding up a little bit because I'm running out of time. Okay, so getting back to Portlock. After the Missing in Alaska show aired, I was contacted by this gentleman named Jake Wagner. And Jake is a man's man, in my opinion, because he decided to kayak to the Portlock area by himself. He's done it on several occasions, gone out there, kayaked up there and camped on the beach and looked for evidence of Bigfoot. So, again, there's an opportunity for some of you, if you're bold enough, to sign up for this expedition that's heading up there here in September. That's an impressive thing. So he's been out there a few times, and he's funneled some evidence to me as well. And here are some of Jake's pictures. This appeared to be a tree that was kind of just kind of driven into the ground according to him, but you can't see the top, so you can't really see if there's a root system. It may very well just be a large barren tree that's kind of there on the beach. But this is the Portlock area. This is the beach where the village once rested. And this is another creepy thing. Jake was, when he was scouting the area, found this Native American, I don't know what you'd call it, a fetish or something like that. What does it mean? You've got some feathers and kind of a bow thing. So this area is again considered very sacred and foreboding by the local native people, the Kenai tribe and others. So Jake, when he found this thing, he felt like, well, this kind of feels like a warning, like they're kind of warning people to stay out of this area. So pretty spooky stuff. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up by talking about two other types of mystery hominids that have been reported from Alaska. So Alaska also has a version of Littlefoot, as I call them. And there are many local names, Anukins, I'm not going to try to pronounce that second one, the Imanaraks, Urchinrock, Ishtiak, Muskalatox, Jinxiak, very similar to Little People legends around the world, and again, very similar in many respects to the Orang Pendek stories, because people describe something that is very distinct from Bigfoot or Sasquatch, standing about 3 feet tall, covered in hair, man-like, but very, very powerful. And people are very, very terrified of the little people. In fact, we did an episode called The Ice Gnomes. Sorry, it was the idea of the producers. We don't always have control over these things. Where we talked about these little people, these little hairy creatures, hominids. And the people that I talked to in Alaska seem to be much more terrified of these little hairy dwarfs than they are of the Sasquatches or the hairy man. But as in many little people cultures around the world, they're often endowed with kind of magical abilities. This is a woman named Sarah that we interviewed for the episode, and she lives up on the western coast of Alaska, kind of near Nome. And she claimed that her family has had several encounters with these little hairy creatures, and that they've terrorized her, kidnapped her, abducted her dogs, and terrorized her children, and that they run under her house and things like that. And then finally, we did an episode called The Devil Monkeys, and there is a legend from eastern Alaska. It's an Athabascan legend that refers to creatures called the Katani or the Chechen. And the translation of that means the tailed ones. And according to the legends there, these are distinct from either the Sasquatch or the little hairy dwarfs. These are basically monkeys, snow monkeys, that live in the caves, that are, very scary and feared, and kind of run around in the trees sometimes too. Well, when the producers initially came to me with this idea and said, we want to do this story about snow monkeys, I was like, snow monkeys? Monkeys in Alaska? Come on. But then I realized and remembered, well, wait a minute. You have the Japanese snow macaques, which are a species of monkeys that are very acclimated to the snow and the cold. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility that something like that could also exist in Alaska. And when we were filming the episode, when we were doing our investigation, we did hear like things scurrying through the trees at night. And so it was really freaky for us, because we got really, we were kind of at one point convinced, well, maybe there is something to this. Maybe there are these monkey-like creatures living in the trees. But after we finished the episode and I did a little bit of more research, I found out that there's actually a species of flying squirrel that lives in Alaska. It's a nocturnal flying squirrel that people hardly ever see, but they scurry around in the treetops. So that may very well have been what we had heard, since we didn't find any evidence of quote-unquote snow monkeys. And I'm pretty much at my time limit, so I'm sorry if I rushed through that a little bit, but I wanted to try to cram in as much information as possible. I will be out here at my table for about another hour.